Hello, everyone. It's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another episode of Voices from the Shadow Realm, the podcast where we sit down with the many different wonderful Yu-Gi-Oh! Voice actors that helped bring the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise to life. And in today's episode, I am joined by the one, the only, Jontahan Ross. Jontahan, you voiced Yami Marik, one of the most iconic villains in the entire franchise. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm always happy to talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! and all the things that stemmed from it.
And a lot of things have stemmed from it, especially, you worked on the original show, almost 20 years ago. So, we'll get into all that, but seriously, thank you so much for coming on. So, I always like to just have the first kind of question, just allow you to introduce yourself. I know you voiced some characters in Pokemon. I'm sure you have a pretty sizable resume. You also voiced a couple of characters in GX, I believe, right? The Princeton, the older brothers there. So if you could just introduce yourself, go over some roles you want to talk about, that'd be awesome.
So Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course was the big one. It wasn't quite the first, but it was pretty close to being the first thing I ever did in the world of voiceovers. Along the way, if nothing ever achieved the heights of Marik, I got to be a part of just a ton of shows, mostly at 4Kids, which included Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which as a Turtles fan growing up was like, that was like the moment where I was like, oh man, I made it. As was being, on every couple episodes of G.I. Joe as like a soldier running in, those shows that I had grown up with. It was awesome to be part of the reworkings of them. And then, on shows like Pokemon, which is the only anime I've done that my almost 9-year-old cares about. I was on Wings Club. I was on you got to go back to the beginning, but towards the beginning of One Piece. I was a character named Koza, who was on for a bunch of episodes, but in the scheme of the entire show, when you have 1,000 some episodes, it ended up being a small percentage. And a ton, Sonic X, and it was really fun to be a part of not just those shows, but I would also say sort of a flashpoint in anime in the United States.
Oh yeah,
and the English speaking world.
Yeah, no, 100%. A lot of those early 4Kids productions, and I'm sure it was awesome to be a part of a lot of them. That's awesome. So listen, I'm a complete Yu-Gi-Oh! Maniac nerd. I've watched every single episode, subbed and dubbed, of every single show. It's crazy. But I'd love to know, because throughout all these years, I've seen a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters. I've seen a lot of villains across the 8 shows. I said it 4 years ago when I did a top 10 favorite villains video, and I still feel that way today. Marik, Yami Marik, I think the best villain ever in all of the entirety of Yu-Gi-Oh! So, you're welcome, and your performance definitely, helped that 100%. What was it like to voice such an iconic villain in this franchise?
So what's both fun and weird about the experience of doing Yu-Gi-Oh! First, it's that I came into it with no real understanding, honestly, of anime in general, of where anime was globally at that time. And this was, I believe it was 1999 in Japan is when it premiered. So we're 25th anniversary, and I believe 2002 or 3, I'm not sure exactly, in America, but I wasn't really aware it was a thing until I had recorded 15 episodes.
Yeah.
And then, then you start noticing, and you'd see a magazine, I saw a magazine with Marik on the cover, and it was There was such like a wild experience. And then like the other part of that is that voice acting is a very solitary job. I mean, you don't want to overstate it. Like there are people in the room. There's an engineer and a director, and but like I didn't meet a lot of the other voice actors until a few months into it. Really, like you'd meet someone in passing, but so when it happened, it was cool. It was so cool to like have a job. I was a pretty young guy. Pretty fresh out of college, and like I was so thrilled to have like a professional job. But it, the iconic part, your words, not mine, but like the idea that, like, right, but the idea that it was like a big thing that 20 years later or so that I am able to, I started a little while ago going to more Comic-Cons and to do more interviews like this, and the idea that 20 years later, people are still interested in it. People are still playing the game. People are going back to like rewatch the earlier episodes.
Oh, yeah.
People are new episodes, of the newer version. The idea that it's still around in that way is really mind-boggling. But then also as like a voice actor, it's not like anyone's recognizing me.
Right.
So it all takes place in this very weird little bubble. Where every once in a while the bubble pops and you realize that the show was meaningful to a lot of other people.
A lot of people, yeah. And I mean, it's not just me. There's, I'm sure, a lot of people that feel like Marik, and of course you were a big part of that. That character is one of the greatest villains in Yu-Gi-Oh! And, a show really is only as good as its villain. I've always felt that way. And a hero's story is only as good as how much the villain pushes that hero. And, Marik was just such a good character. And I think you did such a great job. I do want to touch on an element that you brought up that I think a lot of people don't think about too often when it comes to voice actors. Obviously, not being recognized in the streets like a stage actor or a movie actor. That's kind of common sense because, it's just your voice, and a lot of times the voice, but you don't necessarily know what the voice actor looks like. But I think a lot of people think that voice acting is this thing where a bunch of the voice actors are at the same time in a room, like going off of each other. But that's not really the case, right? Because I remember when I toured 4K, the studios a couple of years ago, I got the privilege of touring it, and I actually saw a session. Darren Dunstan, who voiced Pegasus, I'm sure you know Darren. He was there. I talked to him. He's a great human being. He really is. And but you really are going in kind of to a booth by yourself, and then you're leaving, and you don't really get to meet a lot of the people that you're interacting with on the show. Is that an accurate representation?
Yes, and it was only, every once in a while, one show for a long time, it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, was the one where everyone got to record together. So like that's when you would like hang out with other people. But then the rest of the time, especially in the world of dubbing, the work of figuring out the plot of the show and what's right for the character and all those different things predate you. And so, as an actor, especially if you've gone to school for it, no judgments, positive or negative, on going to school for acting. But I did happen to go to school for acting.
That was going to be my question.
I have some both positive and negative judgments about it myself.
Sure.
But like you do take it seriously, and you do think of it as as your body as a tool, and when you're doing it is very distinct depending on the format that you're working in, and in voiceover, it is kind of amazing how narrow that gets, right? Where not only are you isolated in a booth, but like you're focusing on one aspect of performance. Probably a lot of voice actors would agree that like you're usually getting your whole body involved.
Right. Right.
And and you are thinking about all those things, but that that really it is such a narrow focus on how can you convey what you need to convey with just one part of your instrument. I know I feel like I strayed far from the question, but it is all sort of connected to me, where it is this very, you know, a sliver, both in terms of like how you're piecing the show together, and then what you're doing as an actor in the booth, is like a very narrow and focused, way to think about acting and performance.
No, it's very well said. I've often said, to me at least, I think voice acting is almost more difficult than like stage acting or movie acting or film acting, because you have to, with film and with stage, you get to convey emotions through your body, as you just said, like through your hands, through your, movements, when you're through your other coworkers that are on stage with you or on set with you. But when you're alone in that booth, I mean, you gotta bring those words to life and convey all that emotion through one tool, as you described it. And I think a lot of people in voice acting just don't give themselves enough credit and get enough credit for that. I mean, it really is admirable. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like every different thing you're going to do is going to have, its own set of challenges.
Right.
And I think probably a lot of actors would agree that like those challenges are always like part of the fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yes, it's like a really unique, weird skill, which, on top of it, for a lot of this work, you're also adding in, like, not just it would be that thing where I'd be at the end of a 2-hour session and like my voice is, shot to hell because, it's really like grinding. And then you'd be like, closing out the act with like, and now I'm going to send you to the shadow realm. And they're like, great read. It doesn't match the flap. And like, the amount of detail that has to go into it, where like you're thinking about the performance, it might be very heightened, but you are thinking about like the character and like what he or she is after at that time. And, you're thinking about, in addition to that, this very technical stuff in the booth. How's my mic placement? How's my, am I backing off the mic enough for like the big laugh? Am I coming in close enough, for a more intimate moment?
Yeah.
There's so many different aspects of it. Like I said before, those challenges are part of the fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's well said. And thanks for kind of giving us all an insight into the logistics of acting and, speaking. So definitely, I'm sure a lot of people don't really know that. So yeah, we definitely appreciate it. Switching it back to Marik, you got Marik, and then of course you've got his Yami form, his darkness, even somehow more crazy and unhinged form, version of himself. So what were some challenges, if you felt like there were any? I know we're going back a while now, to switching between your regular Marik, who's crazy enough, and then Yami Marik, who's just a whole different level.
Yeah, I know one thing that I always thought was pretty funny about it. This is not a knock on anyone or even the process of making Yu-Gi-Oh or any of those cartoons. But it was a very fast pace, right? Mm-hmm. And there's limited time, and every week, they are fitting together like 20, 30 different, pieces of the voice acting puzzle and the sound design puzzle. And then they have other things they need to worry about, and they're worried about scripts, and they're trying to get like weeks out in advance. And, what happens, in there, especially, like I said, I was coming out of school, and it's like, oh, can you tell me about my character? And it's like, we don't have time for that. Like,
really?
Well, I mean, I don't even mean it in like a negative way. Like,
it's just like New York, like, we gotta go.
Yeah, it was like, we're hiring you to, you do that job. Like, we will give you whatever we can. They were great. The writers were great.
Yeah.
The producers were great. The directors were great. I don't mean that they were dismissive about like character.
Right.
But I was coming from a place where I wanted like a script, like, weeks in advance, and they're like, well, we can't do that. Like it's going to be ready the day you come. Like, you just gotta like show up and be ready to go, and you adjust your process for for the style you have to work. Like, It's not, you learn really quick that it's like not all about you. And so with that in mind, there was no indication until I was in the booth, and the director, great guy, Chris Collet, he's like, okay, now something really wild's gonna happen. And like, he showed the clip where like for the first time, like Marik's eye like pops out.
Yep.
And he was like, okay. And then he was like, now we have to have the talk. Where it was like, you've been at a 10 for like the last 2 years, and now we need you to go to 11. Like, you got to find like this extra gear.
Oh yeah.
For this character to go to. And again, there's not a lot of time to be like, oh, let me go sit and think. So really it was, the way that came about was just thinking in terms of Marik plus, like, how can it go from being, the way I thought of it at the time, to be able to look at, that image that they were showing me of like Marik's eye popping out and the veins, and I would say even a hint of like it went from a character who was, just with his own reasons, evil. We can say he was doing evil things.
Yeah.
But with a purpose.
Sure.
And
agreed.
That in my head that moved towards, like someone who's like lost it, like someone who has, become untethered from his own reality.
Yeah. Evil to be evil,
and more of like a pure evil.
Yep.
As opposed to someone who ultimately, and again, I wasn't even really aware of this at the time, of the idea that like, Marik and his redemptive arc, where he's essentially the only one who can defeat the evil inside him, and ultimately end up being helpful to to our heroes. And so it really was just about like, how can I personally turn that up to 11? And it was, we talking about like using your body in the booth. It was about like, sometimes I'd be like, you'd be in there with like, like to really like go for it with my full body as much as I could and still be on mic.
Yeah, that classic Marik laugh. I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, you kind of touched on it. Is it painful to do that laugh?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not, here's the thing. And this is a live and learn kind of thing. I had no idea at the outset of getting the job as Marik that Marik was going to be like the bad guy for a long time on the show. That was going to involve 4 to 8 to 10 hours in the booth doing this very grating voice.
Yeah.
For years on end. And I also didn't know that there was going to be a point where they were going to be like, how can you do that but more?
Squared.
And I would, I'd like to joke about how like, after doing Yami, there would be times where towards the end of that arc when we would record one character, we would record the other. We'd do like all the Yami Marik and we'd do all the Marik, and they'd be like, oh, what do you want to do first? And it'd be like, oh no, I want to do Yami Marik first, because going from Yami Marik to Marik would feel like a vacation.
Jeez.
Whereas if we started the other, it would be like that. They'd be like, I wouldn't have any, if I started with Marik, by the end of recording Marik's lines, I just wouldn't have anything left in the tank.
Yeah.
Because it was physically, so like now we're talking and I can be like, Shadow Realm, and like, that's fine. But like I was doing that for like,
8 hours, right?
And like we would learn to like, that it made a lot more sense to like break up my sessions, instead of doing like a 3-hour chunk, to be like, let's do an hour and a half on Monday and an hour and a half on Friday. And like, we would find ways to like, space it out so that I'd remain in relative vocal health.
Yeah.
throughout.
Yeah. I mean, your normal voice doesn't sound anything like Marik. So getting to that level, yeah, I can. I know, because I use my voice a lot. I know I'm not a voice actor by any means, but I know getting to that space with your voice, 8 hours. Yeah, that's brutal. I had to ask you about that because that laugh does not sound like it would feel pleasant. It sounds great for a villain. Doesn't Sound like it would
Right.
feel
And like I
pleasant.
said, like now it's also like, it's fine. It's like, as an old man, it's like when you see like an old timers baseball game where it's like, they step back into it. Like it doesn't, it's
Yeah,
not,
yeah. They throw
you're
that pitch.
not quite the same, but like,
Yeah, that's too funny. That's too funny. Well, outside of the memories of being in pain from doing that laugh, is there any good memories that I'm sure there's good memories. Let me reword that question. Is there any like single memory that really stands out, like a favorite moment that you have? Could have been like a monster summoning, something that maybe was behind the scene, like improv. Just like a favorite moment of yours when you think back on your years of voicing Marik.
As an actor, not every job is King Lear, right? Especially, if any of your viewers are actors themselves, like, especially being in New York, like you would do like tons of bad stuff and sometimes stuff would be good. But like the job, is everything, even if it's not King Lear, everything's King Lear. And I would actually say that from what I know of a lot of the other actors, that like that really was everyone's approach, that like everyone really treated it with the seriousness with which you would hope they would treat it.
Yeah.
I really do think it meant, and I know that was the case for me. That preface is really just to say that there is a great episode where it's a Marik flashback episode, and it's an exploration of like the first time that like he was evil and like he wanted a motorcycle but he couldn't. He had responsibilities from like even as a 5-year-old.
Yep.
And it was like, here's Marik at age 5 and Marik at age 9, and here's Marik in the present, but then there's Yami Marik at age 9, and then there's Yami Marik and so it was like 6 or 7 different like Marik versions, and it was this sort of exploration of where this character came from. And I'm not being sarcastic when I say that like it was really exciting, even if it was a animation that its intended audience at the time was like Saturday morning cartoons, that it was really exciting to like get under the hood of the character a little bit and to approach all of those different moments in his life, which again, like it wasn't like I knew that episode was coming. It wasn't that I had the script ahead of time, or that even there was anything earlier on in the character to necessarily hint at a in a sense a tragic story that would lead him to being evil and doing evil.
Yeah.
Like that, like I loved Marik's like King Lear episode. I loved where it was like, let's explore this character, and it was really fun to treat it with a level of seriousness that I would say matched what everyone was trying to do on that show, but that you wouldn't necessarily assume is where we're coming from,
Yeah, I mean that Marik backstory episode, one of my favorites. I mean, again, he's my favorite villain throughout all 8 Yu-Gi-Oh shows for a reason. Great backstory that makes you feel for the character, and anytime a show can make you feel for a character that is doing evil things, that's the sign of a really, in my opinion, well-written character. I want to shift from the character-driven side and the actual show-driven side to kind of what Yu-Gi-Oh is when you get it to its core, and that is a card game. Now, I've watched a couple of interviews of yours, and I know you've gone on record that you've talked about how just overwhelming the game of Yu-Gi-Oh is, which I agree with. So you're not going to get any, clap back from me on that. But what was that experience like? Because obviously you have your character and you have the story of that character as well as the overarching story, but at its core, it is still a bunch of characters playing like a card game. So like, have you, ever tried to get into the card game, or, has it just always been like just lines on a character basically?
When it would get into the moves, my level of commitment belied the fact that I had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah.
When I would, and a few years ago, Darren Dunstan and I did a live duel for one of the championships.
Yes.
And the writer of the producer of the event came over, and they were like, "Here's a script," and they were like, "Do you guys like?" Darren knows a lot more of how it all works, of course, but I was like, I was like, okay, so like, what's gonna happen? And they were like, everyone's gonna react when you do this move, and I was like, why? And they were like, don't worry about it, but just you're gonna leave a pause before your next line because there's gonna be a big reaction. And that remains the case with, when I see clips from the show, or when I like think about that experience, where like I never had any idea what like the actual moves we're doing that we can talk about in the booth. But again, like as an actor, it's like, you could be doing a show about nuclear physics, and you don't have to be like, that's part of being an actor. Like
Correct.
you don't have to know about nuclear physics. You have to understand the stakes behind it. And so that's what we would talk about a lot in the booth, about like the stakes of a different move, or where the character was at emotionally. But no, I had zero idea. I still to this day have no idea how the game works. And even more than that, like I know it's different, but like my daughter about a year ago got into Pokemon.
Yes.
And she's more into the characters, the zoology of the game, and all that. But like she tried once to explain the game to me, and like even Pokemon, which I know is not nearly as complicated, I was still like, I don't, like, for whatever reason, I just cannot wrap my mind how it works. And my understanding is that the way the game has evolved, it's even way more complex and intricate than 20 years ago.
I mean, to a degree that can't even be stated. I mean, now you got like links, pendulums, XZs, synchros. Fusions were still around. They were just in the infancy stage in the original show. But yeah, it's crazy complicated. But I always like to ask, because I always get different responses, because there's some voice actors who are like really into it and like actually playing them. There's others that are like, I try to pronounce it the best I can, and that's that.
I know that's a thing. Like the pronunciations were the big thing, and then I just for the record, I think it's great. Like I'm a very big believer in that, like that people engage with their fandom in lots of different ways, and as long as it's positive. Like I love the idea that some people are coming to it from the card game, and some people are coming to it from the show, and that their relationships with that and the degrees to which they're involved are like really different. And I love that it's possible to engage with it in so many different ways.
Very, very well said.
I think it's really cool. And that's been the case now for like a really long time, like being able to see people enjoy it. And I think that's obviously part of the reason why it's had such a long life. I think probably both the game and the continuing shows probably still feed into each other in very similar ways.
No, very well said. Well, actually, that leads me perfectly into the next question, which is about Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole, and just how much it's grown in these last 20 years, since you worked on the original series. 7 spin-off shows, one of the most successful trading card games in the world. Going back to yourself 20 years ago, could you have ever envisioned this franchise reaching the heights that it's reached? And the fact that the anime is still going in the year 2023 and will be still going in 24?
No, I wouldn't have any conception. I would say no. No,
it's crazy. I mean, it really is crazy.
And I think generationally, there are good and bad things about this in our culture, but like, as a child growing up, in the 80s, I was used to things ending, and I was used to where it would be like, wait, they're making another Indiana Jones? Like, it wasn't like assumed that the thing you love would continue.
Yes.
Certainly I would say looking at it now, for reasons of profit and for reasons of a genuine like love of the game and of the shows, for the fans, and also of the creators who worked on it and built this incredible world and built out from that incredible world, in retrospect, would I have thought it then? No. And then it was like, oh, I got this job, and then like that that arc on that show ended, and it was like, oh man, that was really fun. Like I had no idea that years later it would be a thing that I'm still talking about and that I'm still in some aspects involved in. I'm not asking me now in 2023, I'm not surprised now in looking at it that that it's maintained that level of interest and of fandom.
Yeah, no, very well said.
No, there's no way I could have predicted.
I don't think anybody could have. I mean, really, there's an event happening next week where some of us are expecting the 9th Yu-Gi-Oh series to potentially be announced. I mean, we don't think it's ever going to end, and why would it? It's crazy that something you worked on 20 years ago is still in some way airing still. I mean, it really is crazy. And that actually kind of leads into the next question pretty well, because your arc ends, as you just said, and it's like, oh, that was fun, and then you kind of move on with your life. 10 years later, a really nifty, actually a little more than 10 years later, a really nifty, cool mobile app comes out called Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links, and it has to do, obviously, with the game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but it also has to do with the characters, and the characters that we all love from all the different shows. So Marik comes to Duel Links, and I'm assuming you probably got a call or an email like, hey, we want you to reprise your role. What was that whole process like, and how cool was it to do that so many years later?
That's the thing. It's always fun to like return to it. And I know this is only like a theoretical, but like even when they're like, whoa, would you come back again? Or if they like redid something with the original cast, like, yeah, in a heartbeat. Like it was fun then. It's fun now. I think I would know better how to manage my vocal health.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like fun to like come back to. In some ways, it's like the coming back to it is almost more fun, in a sense, to be able to like, it's like going home to like a reunion. You know what I mean? Mostly I record audiobooks now, and I've gotten better at planning for the eventuality that if I narrate a fiction, and it seems like a one-off, that 4 years from now, I might be asked to record a sequel,
right?
Or like and I a few years ago narrated like a very dense fantasy novel with like 50 characters, and I essentially had to like re-listen to the original audiobook to try to remember what I did for everyone.
Right.
And like, what's so nice about a show like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is like, I don't have to do that. Like, it was one of those jobs that I've had, that I was able to do long enough and intensely enough that it was in my bones. So like coming back for a game, first off, it's always fun to be a part of like a game. And it's like, it's a, the record is essentially the same. It's it's just sort of a fun, because you're always putting it together piecemeal anyway, and it was no different in terms of like, Marik's a little annoyed, Marik's like medium annoyed, Marik's really upset, like you're that's really fun, but it's also like not too dissimilar to like, okay, here's this time code, and you give them a little grunt. Like it's the same, you're piecing it together in the same way, but it was like putting on an old comfy sweater.
Yeah, no, it's a good way to describe it. It sure is a really cool feeling. So you
Well,
kind
I guess like a sweater you love, but that is incredibly like rough and coarse,
of worn,
and
yeah.
just very like cute. But instead it's your vocal cords.
Right. And you have to also know that so many people love
Yeah.
that sweater, right? I mean, that's the
Right.
thing. So you coming
Look,
back,
that's
it's,
fair, right.
yeah, right. That's so funny. So you kind of said it, but I'll just rewind back to it. I'm kind of known for having a lot of out there theories and crack theories is what I call them. I had a video a couple weeks ago. I believe a Duel Links movie would be very, very cool. And I think that it might be a possibility, just, some foreshadowing hints within the game. If that happened, and if Marik was in that movie, you're saying you would love to come back.
Oh my God, 100%.
All right.
It would be the most exciting thing.
All right, perfect.
It's I don't know. I think it's just the holiday season feeling like that holiday nostalgia. But I do feel like there is that thing where like, when you're younger and you say goodbye to something and it feels like forever. And I think what I'm trying to say is that like it's like all that's left is like good memories and warm memories.
Yeah.
I don't remember the scars on my vocal cords, or like the sadness of like Marik came to the end and you're like my job, my money,
Right. Yeah.
what am I going to do?
What's
like,
next?
Right. Like all that's left is like, oh, like it's so great. And like I said earlier, I'm relatively new on the con circuit. I don't do a ton of events, but like it is what's fun is like increasingly you get to cross paths with, with other people in the cast and other people who had, that you shared in this with. And I know like there's a big event coming up in May that was just announced where it's going to be a pretty big Yu-Gi-Oh reunion.
Yeah, I saw that too. Are you attending that?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'm sure a lot of people. Unfortunately, I had a prior trip that exact week, so
it's Mother's Day weekend.
it is. Yeah,
but like, it's so like with all this stuff, it is fun to like come back to it and be like, hello, old friend, and sometimes literally like, oh, hello, old friends. But like the role, the community. And yeah, of course, I would, if there was something where Marik came back and they asked, I would absolutely say yes.
Cool. And final, what?
I hope they do.
I hope so too. I mean, listen, if I get my favorite villain in a crazy multiversal movie, I mean, you're not going to hear any complaints from me, Last question here, because I want to kind of give you the space to speak about it from the heart. You said a lot of great things, and that's another great thing that cons allow you to do. You kind of already hinted at it, which is interact with just people from the community, people like me that love the shows, that love your performance, that love Yu-Gi-Oh. Over all these years, what does Yu-Gi-Oh and its community mean to you?
The real-time experience of doing Marik back in the the early and mid aughts, like I said, it was a little isolating. It was also like pre-social media.
Mm-hmm.
So I can say I didn't check out a message board or two at the time, but like what's funny is I know at the time I think there was a lot more dissension between like the only thing that you would hear, because it was adults watching the show,
censorship.
And I understand that, and I understood it at the time, and I never took it personal, even when it got sometimes personal. But what's so nice now, I know I'm making myself sound like 100 years old. I'm not 100 years old. But like in my, my mid 40s, that the thing that I hear a lot now is how much the show meant to people when they were watching it, when they were kids, or teens, and then they grew up with it, and that, that love of Yu-Gi-Oh, and the other shows that were its contemporaries, which were kind of at the the vanguard of anime in America, in terms of like broadening the audience, like beyond Ghost in a Shell was like, as a college kid, was like that was that and was pretty much the only thing on my radar.
Yeah.
And now you fast forward 20 years later, and it's like now these kids are grown up. Some of them, are coming by to cons with their kids who are now like starting to get into the show.
Yeah, crazy.
But like that's so. What it means to me now is like I couldn't have imagined while we were recording it how meaningful it would be years later. Hearing that from people, being able to meet people at cons, I find it touching every time someone says it to me, when they're like, "Oh man, this show was my childhood," and I, honestly, a lot of that comes, from being a parent. Like I see when you're a parent and you see the degree to which when your kids love something, they really love it.
Yeah,
like some of the shows my kids watch, including Pokemon, which my older daughter is a big fan of Pokemon, and it's kind of, when I got to go in for career day, it was like the first time where she was like, "Oh, my dad has a cool job."
Yeah,
and she got to see like other kids be like, "Oh, your dad has a cool job." She's like, "Oh, he does have a cool job." And it is because you, especially when you're at an age when you're so open to another world like it, be when the stakes of that show are not just life and death for the characters, but like feel life and death to you,
right?
That when you're able to hear someone reflect that experience at a con, or in an email, like it really is just an incredibly nice thing. And I don't want to speak for any other people, probably even people that you've had on the show. But I was thinking, in relation, I don't want to make it negative at all. I'm just keep it with positive.
You can be as honest as you need to be.
The people that I had the pleasure to work with, and some of them I know better than others, are like really nice people.
Yeah.
And I think have like a very genuine affection for the work that we all did, and some of them have been on like tons of stuff and are like big names, and I my impression has always been that probably for them as well, like when they get to hear someone be like, "This show was my childhood," it is as meaningful to them as it is for me, and it's a very lovely group of people.
Yeah,
and not every, I don't think every show that people love have that.
No.
I won't name names, but like I was thinking about it just the other day, how the cast of Yu-Gi-Oh is really nice.
Yeah, everyone that I've met, voice actor that's on the newer shows, or voice actor that was on the older shows, or voice actors that have been on like every show, it seems.
Yeah.
I've never, honest to God, I've never had a negative or bad interaction or experience with any of them. You know,
and you could make theories for it. Probably one of them is just like Darren Dunston's nice.
Yeah.
Probably a lot. Honestly, probably a lot stems from that. But
he's great. He really is.
Like a linchpin of like a lot of people have those relationships with. But yeah, it is a nice group, and it's so great to meet people at cons and to reconnect with those people at these cons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jonathan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. I mean, I never thought when I started this channel, 7 years ago, I'd be interviewing the man who brought my favorite favorite all-time Yu-Gi-Oh villain to life. So great work again as Marik and Yami Marik. Yeah, I always refer to them as two separate characters, but which I guess that's a debate for another time. But Jonathan Ross, everyone, I'll have any socials that he wants me to have linked down below. Is there anything you want to promote before we wrap things up here? Any cons or any works that you're in, anything like that?
I'm sure there'll be more, more before this, but the next one that is officially on the books is NostalgiaCon in San Antonio in May, I believe the second weekend in May. Like I said, a huge 25th Yu-Gi-Oh reunion. Right now it's mostly just audiobooks for me. If you like books and you want to hear me read them in not a Marik voice, in just a regular normal voice, please check them out. But otherwise, it's the holidays. Be nice to each other.
Great message.
You.
Yes, great message. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming on. And to everybody watching on YouTube or listening on podcasting platforms, thank you. This has been episode 5 of the Voices from the Shadow Realm podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.